Welcome to the personal video of the World War II pictures and experiences of former U.S. Army Air Force Captain Henry W. Dahlberg, Jr., known to his family and friends as Hank. I have put this video together because of their urging and as a historical record for my 2 children and my 4 grandchildren. Now, I need to give you some of my early history. I was born in Denver, Colorado on June 26, 1916, the oldest of 5 children. In 1924, at the age of almost 8, Dad took Mother and me on a trip to Europe, where we visited England, Belgium, France, Switzerland, and then Italy. In Rome, we saw a huge parade led by their new fascist dictator, Benito Mussolini. Little did I know that I would be back in Italy 20 years later. Flying fascinated everyone in 1927 when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. I had my first plane ride for 15 minutes in an open cockpit biplane over Chicago at the 1934 World's Fair. I followed my father's footsteps and went to the University of Minnesota, where I graduated in chemical engineering in June of 1940. In September, I married Patsy Jane Young of Denver, and we had a little over a year of married life in Oregon before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, on December 7th, 1941. About 4 months later, we returned to Denver, and I volunteered for the U.S. Army Air Force. My eyeglasses kept me from becoming a pilot, but I was accepted to go into training to become a squadron engineering officer. I had to wait until the spring of 1943 for my call to active duty, so I first got a job in the parts department of a small Denver airport, and I used my pay for flying lessons in a Cub airplane until I was able to solo and cruise around the sky and clouds above Denver. It was a great thrill. Now we can get to the slides. This first slide shows a line of Cub planes in Denver where I soloed. They would only hold 2 people. Here is how I looked when I was called to active duty at age 26 to become an aviation cadet. I was ordered to report to the Technical Training Command at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. This is of the center of New Haven known as the Commons. This shows one of the buildings on the beautiful Yale campus. This is the huge Yale dining hall where 1,000 cadets were fed at a time. At noon, we were entertained by Captain Glenn Miller and his band up on one of the balconies. Patsy was one of the many girls and wives who waited on us. In class, we studied hydraulics, engines, electrical systems, flight instruments and controls, fuel systems, wing and body repairs, and much more. Every day, we marched several miles, singing songs in cadence to get into good physical condition. On July 12, 1943, I was made a second lieutenant and received orders to report to Gowan Field at Boise, Idaho, an air base for big B-24 4-engine heavy bombers. In Boise, Patsy and I had a small basement apartment, and we adopted Rusty. At Boise, our 485th Bomb Group was assembled and was composed of 4 squadrons of 18 B-24's each. They were the 828th, 829th, 830th, and 831st Squadrons. I was made the 831st Squadron Engineering Officer in charge of 84 enlisted maintenance men. Our squadron commander was Captain Danny Shodine, and our group commander was Lieutenant Colonel Walter Pop Arnold, who was age 30. He was responsible for 72 bombers, 872 flyers, and 968 ground personnel for a total of nearly 2,000 men. In late October of 1943, our entire group was transferred to our own tactical base in Fairmount, Nebraska. This is a picture of Patsy and me at our cabin court in nearby York, Nebraska. This is a shot at Fairmount of a typical flight crew of 10 men made up of the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and 6 gunners, one at the nose, then the top turret, the ball turret underneath, 2 waist gunners, and the tail gunner. The ground personnel had to head for Italy by Liberty ship. Here are 3 of our 831st men headed by train for the East Coast. They are Sergeant Martin, Lieutenant Anderley, and Major Farnsworth. This was their final photo because they never made it. As I was in charge of all maintenance, I was required to fly in one B-24 while one of my crew chiefs was on each of the others. I smuggled my camera on board and took this shot as we left Florida for South America on March 15, 1944. I have drawn this map to show you how we got to Italy. Our first stop was in Puerto Rico, then to British Guiana, then São Luís and Natal in Brazil. Then with big gas tanks plumb full in the Bombays, we headed nonstop across the Atlantic. It was a long, monotonous 13 hours before we landed at Dakar, West Africa. The final stops were at Marrakesh in Morocco, Tunis, and our final base at Venosa, Italy. Now for some of the scenes along the way. At São Luís, Brazil, we saw what the British were using to spot German submarines. Here we are taxiing out for takeoff at São Luís. A big baobab tree at Dakar. Note my buddy standing next to it. A Dakar mother and baby. She definitely did not want her picture taken. A Dakar family picnic on the beach. A Dakar fishing group. Dakar farmhouses. Our navigator came down with a fever and had to go to this French hospital in Marrakesh. A shot of the dining room of a fancy hotel in Marrakesh. This is the harbor at Bizerte, Tunisia. It's all shot up and ships sunk. I took this on April 14th, 1944, but the Kodak censors didn't send this one and a number of others to me until nearly 8 months after World War II was over. Our 485th ground personnel headed for Italy on 2 Liberty ships in a big convoy. Just off of Algiers, the convoy was attacked by 6 Nazi torpedo planes. One torpedo hit the USS Paul Hamilton, loaded with 154 of our 831st men, of which about 40 were my own engineering boys. It was also loaded with bombs and gasoline, and at 9 p.m. on March 20th, 1944, here was the result. The explosion shot up over 1,000 feet in the air, and 504 men died instantly. The pieces of the ship sank in 30 seconds. Also gone were my 3 friends that I showed you earlier. After a month of additional training and practice near Tunis, we passed by these mountains and shores of the island of Sicily on our final hop from Africa to Italy. Our base was built on sloping wheat fields by a corps of American black engineers. Here's one of them watching us arrive. This is my line chief, Master Sergeant Ward, my top enlisted man. Note the perforated steel plates to the right, which were laid down for our landing strip, taxiways, and parking areas. The planes were parked well apart from each other in the event of an enemy air attack. Here is the Venosa countryside. The ancient castle, moat, and small city are 5 miles away. They date back to before the time of Christ. Not far from the base, there was this quarry for cutting tufa blocks. Tufa is a sandstone that is soft when cut and then hardens in a short time. You can see that I had to horn in everywhere. Here is an expert cutting the individual blocks. And here is a tufa block building. This was our chapel. One of our officers was a full-time chaplain. I think you'll get a kick out of this one. I had this picture taken of me as a touch of humor for the folks at home. When I ran across this destroyed Italian plane, I put my cap on backwards and labeled this shot, quote, "Flight Ace Dahlberg returns safely after a tough fight," unquote. Here are officers' bungalows of tufa block with window glass from vehicles that had been destroyed in battles. One of my 2 roommates, Lieutenant Walt Hardwick, the 831st Ordnance Officer. He was in charge of machine guns, ammunition, and loading the bombs. At the 831st Flight Line, you can see my small wooden engineering office at the extreme left, buildings for parts and repair bays, and our full-size aviation gasoline tankers. Home from a bombing mission. The brakes were shot out, so this plane ran clear off the end of the runway and into the mud. The ambulance is for several wounded. This is one of our B-24's, painted a dark color and newly equipped with radar, ready for a secret night mission. Our group commander, Colonel Arnold, was the pilot of a ship like this one when they were shot down over Blechhammer, Germany. He was badly wounded, but all of them parachuted safely. They were immediately captured. Colonel Arnold was in a German hospital for 3.5 months, and his weight dropped to 97 pounds. He and the rest were moved 3 times to other prison camps as the Russians got closer. The last move was a forced march of 25 miles. After 9 long months, they were liberated by General George Patton. Colonel Arnold is now General Arnold. He's almost 87 years old, living in Colorado Springs, and a close friend. Here's my best buddy, Captain Robert L. Brown, a pilot known as Brownie, ready for us to go on a Jeep trip. He did a terrific job of playing the piano most evenings at the mess hall. I am also now a captain, and Brownie took this one entitled, "Spring is Here. Note the castle on the top of the hill." We ran across this ornate gate, but the castle beyond is in total ruins. Both of us were fascinated by this horse-drawn water wheel that was made entirely of wood. Many Italian towns are like this one, perched on top of a hill or a mountain.